Today, we are very, very fortunate, extremely lucky to have with us a very senior and distinguished person. He's Mathew Varghese. Uh, he's still a globally influential figure in the sphere of humanitarian aid and international development. His competence in leadership and strategic vision are still critical to our pursuit of peace and security. Well, that's a mouthful, but he deserves it because he recently retired as the executive director of, now let me read this carefully, system-wide evaluation at the executive office of the Secretary General of the United Nations. In other words, he's sitting right nearby the UN Secretary General. We don't get people who have that kind of proximity to the UN Secretary General, so we are very lucky. Now, what did he do there? His remit involved measuring the UN development system's contribution to countries to their efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We are all familiar with the SDGs. The UN keeps track of the progress towards the SDGs, and Mathew was right there at the top thinking about the progress, measuring it, and so on. And during the pandemic, he provided leadership to the evaluation at the UN Socio-Economic Response to COVID-19. So once again, in action at the time of COVID. Before that, he held several key positions, including Under-Secretary General of the International Federation of the Red Cross, Senior Policy Advisor at the World Bank in Cambodia, Head of the Delegation of the Red Cross in Sudan. So indeed, he's been right at the scene of the action and has seen it, observed it, and evaluated it. So let me thank you, Mathew, for being here. We are very, very lucky to have you. Now, what's the topic that he's going to talk about? That is surely very, very important to all of us, especially to those who are in developing countries. It's globalization versus national self-interest. How much do you contribute to the global good? And what if it comes in the way of national self-interest? Okay. What are you supposed to do? One example is in climate change. Let's talk about the developing countries. They have to make a contribution to fighting global climate change. Yes, indeed. But they also have to provide energy to their people as the incomes are rising and the demand for energy is rising. And coal and oil are often the ways to do it. They are the most proven and cheapest and effective ways. There's nothing experimental about it. They're well known. Many countries have those minerals with them, or sometimes they're importing them. But still, coal remains in many countries. And India, for example, wants to use coal to generate electricity, even as it has a very aggressive renewable energy program. So, and what about Africa? They have put out very little CO2 emissions in the past because they have never been industrialized to the same extent as other countries, those countries in sub-Saharan Africa I'm talking about. South Africa, for example, relies on coal for 90% of its electricity. And should it now give up that coal and go in for renewable energy, or should it say, no, my poor people, they need this energy, and I really can't afford to try out something that may not be as efficient. We have no experience with it. We have to depend on outsiders. Why don't we just do coal, which we know we have done it? And so it is a globalization contribution versus national self-interest right there. Now, there can be many more examples, but this is the one that I am familiar with. So I have done this. Now, enough talk from me. Let's listen to our expert. So let's listen to Mathew. Over to you, Mathew. Please begin.
Subodh, I'm truly honored by this gracious invitation and your very kind introduction. I'm fully aware that you are very knowledgeable on international affairs and public policy. Your platform has graced by many distinguished individuals. As you might be aware, some of them are my friends. I'm looking forward to not only share my perspectives, but also to the vibrant exchange of ideas that is the hallmark of your platform.
Okay.
The world is undergoing unprecedented challenges. You mentioned climate change. Let me add a few more. Global health crisis. Third, conflicts. Subodh, you may not know this. In year 2000, when I joined the Red Cross, there were about 60 armed conflicts around the world. Today, the number has risen to more than 100. What is most alarming is that the conflict with and between non-state actors are growing. Ungoverned artificial intelligence. The disruptions from artificial intelligence will not be contained inside national boundaries. It just, the effects are still to be felt, but they will come. The lack of progress on sustainable development goals. Latest available data indicates that no country is on track to achieve all the SDGs by 2030. A few years back, the Secretary General said that the goals are on life support. And now we are pretending that it is still alive.
Okay.
From climate threats, conflict to the wild run of artificial intelligence, our world spins on the edge of uncertainty. Despite these global recognized challenges, there is a critical issue that remains under-discussed, and I will be speaking about it today.
Okay.
The intensify.
By the way, Matthew, before you go ahead, just for some people, when you said non-state actors, some of the young people may not know the term. Could you just explain it?
The non-state, generally what we think is that when there is a war between Ukraine and Russia, there are two states fighting.
Okay.
But when you are fighting Taliban versus another state actor, Taliban is was a non-state actor. Now it has become a state actor.
Yeah.
When you're fighting Al-Qaeda, it's a non-state actor.
Okay. So these are the non-government agencies, so to speak. They are
the
called
non-government armed groups.
Right. Okay, good. I just wanted to be clear for everybody because I know in political terms and international terms, these are well-known terms, but I'm not sure that econ courses teach it. So it's good. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, there are 100 such major conflicts that the Red Cross is put itself into. So it's important, the rise of this. So I come back to the political divide. The intensifying political divide within nations and its suffocating effects on global governance. That's what I want to speak about.
Sure.
In numerous countries, politicians are adapting rigid ideological stances, leaving little room for compromises. Example, Republicans and Democrats in the US, the BJP and Congress in India. The domestic polarization isn't contained within national borders. It significantly influences global governance. The result is a stalemate in global institutions, with nations finding it difficult to find common ground on pressing issues.
Okay.
For example, climate change that you introduced. Multilateral institutions designed to foster global cooperations are feeling the strain. The United Nations, for instance, faces challenges as its members often find themselves at odds, hindering effective collaborations on the global challenges. Previously, we have been in this business for a long time, Subodh. We are getting old. Despite differing opinions among member states at the United Nations, compromises were found. Sometimes not ideal, but compromise they did. Now the unwillingness to find common ground is leading to a deepening of many global challenges. One example is climate change. And you brought out the example of Africa and the coal and how exactly they would be compensated, not compensated, etc. The inability to resolve conflicts prolongs the conflicts, leads to humanitarian crisis, increases human rights violations, and critically leads to the erosion of international norms. The cost of divided world is immense for humanity today and our shared future. It's a silent crisis unfolding beneath the visible crises that are affecting our lives.
Okay.
Throughout my service at the Red Cross and at the United Nations, I never observed such unprecedented prioritization of national self-interest and a lack of cooperation on global stage as I have in recent years. Globalization, which accelerated in the 1980s and early 90s, brought the world closer together, sometimes in an unequal and less sustainable way. However, it brought prosperity to many people and significantly reduced poverty across the world. The world is connected in many ways, economically and through trade, socially and culturally. Technology and social media further helps us live in a globally connected world. However, the current form of globalization seems to be ending. Yes, I said that.
Yeah.
Globalization in its current form seems to be ending. It is not so simple. Even if politics desire a divided world, people of the world remain deeply connected through technology, culture, and business. It is difficult to divide the people of the world overnight after so many years of globalization. This connected and divided world, what I call is connected but divided world, poses a complex scenario as nationalists erect barriers to free trade, immigration, and spread of ideas, challenging a rule-based order of globalization. My assertion underlines the dichotomy of a world where technology, culture, and business connections continue to work amidst a political atmosphere that often seeks to erect barriers to our connected world. I thought this is best illustrated by a few examples.
Please, let's have them.
One example is China's Great Firewall, which both isolates and protects its digital domain from external influence, reflecting a divided yet connected scenario. While China engages in global trade and cultural exchange, its digital barrier symbolizes a political divide that challenges globalization. Populist movement in the US and similar sentiments in parts of Europe have challenged globalization. Yet the global connections through trade, investment, and cultural exchanges continue. Surprising as it might seem, the trade war between China and US has not resulted in lesser trade. The trend is upward for the last 3 years for both countries. US imports from China grew by 6% in year 2022, where we have the latest data. Similarly, despite political tension, the trade between India and China has reached all-time high. Indian imports from China, Indian imports from China grew more than 21% last year. I mean, when you talk about border disputes, this, that, you would think, what's happening to trade? So that is what I was calling about the dichotomy of a connected world and a divided world. And I would like to dig a little deeper because these are interesting subjects. Because Things get more complex when we look at how US and China are acting towards each other. Let us look at decoupling and de-risking. Very complex subjects. The US move towards decoupling created not just political tension, but also financial headaches for business caught in the rising tension between US and China. The sudden change messed up established trade relationships, supply chains, and market access, hurting business scene for both the countries. The financial hit felt by both countries shows how closely tied global economic actions are. Facing the twin challenges of protecting national interest while lessening economic damage, a new approach had to be found. That's where de-risking came in as a strategic answer, offering a framework to handle international relations in a cautious and measured way. Unlike clear-cut separation by decoupling, de-risking suggests more balanced way to lessen potential risk without cutting economic ties suddenly. De-risking talk shifts to a more balanced strategy and lowering risk to international actions. The new approach aims for a thoughtful way to navigate the complex dynamics of international relations. Having said this, let me say that the actual de-risking strategy has never been spelled out by the United States. Some say it is just a change of name, an attempt to lessen self-damage. I give this example to show the complexity of the dance between globalization and national self-interest, each taking turns to lead the way on the global stage. The heart of globalization is its promise for a world knitted together, blending culture, ideas, and economic benefits. Yet the beat of national self-interest and divided world often breaks this harmonious dance, casting a division on global cooperation. Globalization against a backdrop of national self-interest unveils a captivating story full of lessons and challenges. The current geopolitical shifts are leading to a divided world scenario where powerful nations swing between pushing a global agenda and attempt to isolate others and themselves. This fragmentation undermines organizations like the United Nations. This scenario presents a dim future, endangering our shared aspiration for peaceful and sustainable world. Many of us recall the song from the movie, The Lion King, about the circle of life. As bridges tumble to the forces of national self-interest, history assures us that the circle of life will continue to spin.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the speed at which we travel to ruin and then to rebirth remains a path shrouded in mystery. Let me say it again.
Yeah.
Yet the speed at which we travel to ruin and then to rebirth remains a path shrouded in mystery. With those optimistic words, let me say thank you. Subodh, over to you.
Now, before you turn it over to me, I want to ask you, what about localization versus globalization?
Small is beautiful, localization, etc. became the catchphrase. Let me take two examples, Greece and Sri Lanka. Greece went into problems because of bad public policy and a lot of debts. This was basically who is to blame is those who govern. However, when it ran into the debt crisis, there is nothing that the local people could do or the country could do. All decisions regarding Greek was taken in Washington, IMF, World Bank, European headquarters, and that's how globalized the world has become. The Greeks can pay more taxes. It's not the decision how much taxes they will pay to pay back the debt. So there is limit to the localization. It sounds very flowery, it sounds very attractive, but those decisions are actually taken at a different level, where the things that affect their daily lives. Sri Lanka, same. The main donors were bilateral donors were China, India, Japan. The banks, Asian Development Bank was a major lender, so was the World Bank. They took some bad public policy and financial decisions. When it came back to having no money to import oil, for example, the children couldn't go to school. The buses were not running. All decisions had to be taken at the capitals of these countries who gave them the loan. Even if somebody gave, and the sad part was this, even if somebody gave money to Sri Lanka to buy oil, they could not buy the oil because the people whom they brought loans from were saying, you please return our loan before we sell you more.
Yeah.
So these are complex substance. So it looks very easy to say, what about local? How about improving? How about putting your own small garden, etc.? These gardens are useful. I'm not saying that. But overall, in a connected world, you don't have any influence over those decisions. Those decisions are beyond you. So there is globalization versus localization. It's not a discussion. So it sounds very attractive to bring about this, but it doesn't really. If you are sitting in these global discussions, you think, does local people have any influence on this discussions and decisions? No, they can protest as much as they want. The Greeks have protested. The Sri Lankans have protested, but did it bring any changes in the decisions? No. Over to you, Subodh.
Well, thank you, Mathew. I wish I could say as much as you have said in so few words. It's really, I can't do it. You have said so much in so few words that I can only admire you for it and perhaps hope to be able to say such a wide global view in so few words. It's really very powerful. Okay. But let me bounce it back to you in this way. You have rightly pointed out, well, let's not say rightly. I agree with you that there is a divide between the globalization as seen by governments and what is actually happening because of technology and the economic forces, including the flow of students, the flow of capital, and so on. So perhaps we could say that there's a difference in each country between the government and the non-state actors in the country. Okay. And when you mentioned this de-risk, for example, for the US, you first mentioned decoupling and then de-risking. That was the government policy, but it ran into resistance from non-state actors, right? It ran into resistance from those who had the supply chains and those who were selling there. General Motors, Apple, the German car companies and all, they wanted to continue to make money by selling in China. And so de-risking was not a meaningful term because they're not just buying from China, they're selling to China. So you don't want to miss out on the market in China. So in fact, as I understand it, the de-risking is now almost being watered down to something new, which the term hasn't evolved, but it might be like the old détente. Okay, let's see how we can live together without with just cutting off exports of critical items, and that also isn't working because Huawei now has a phone which has the latest technology. So it's sort of a war between a tension between what the government wants and the non-state actors, the young people, the business, young people who want to be on Instagram all over the world, Facebook all over the world, or whatever else they want to be on. So there is a tension there as I see it. Okay. And I'm glad that you have pointed it out so clearly, because I've been thinking about it for some time, that a new globalization is there, and that is coming from the flow of information, the flow of funds, um, and some very clever things that people are doing, which I find that, look, universities in many countries are now not saying, come to my country. They're just saying, you can participate in my seminars online, right? So if you, and I'll give you some money to do that, because I'm going to wash your brain, but I'll do it without you coming here. So just get onto Zoom and you get $1,000 per semester, and you just participate in the lectures by my professors. And this is sort of what is going on, I see. So I'm really thankful to you for putting it so clearly, that what that means is that at the global political level, the cooperation is going down. But at the individual decisions made by non-state actors, though I'm borrowing the term from the political side to the economic side, that those, as you said, the imports of India from China, because India imports critical equipment. And if if the Indian economy is to grow, it needs that equipment. If you're going to do solar energy, you need the solar panels. Solar panels, the heart of solar panels comes from China. The batteries for your EVs are not local. You're going to buy them, maybe from South Korea, maybe from Japan, and maybe from China. So you need these critical industrial things. And as the economy grows, you want those. It's not just buying cheap stuff from China. It's not the case. You are buying critical things even for the pharma sector around the world. Okay, so enough of talk on that, but let me pose a question to you. Is the rise of the Indian and Chinese economy a factor in the change that you see in the international political and governance matters? Is that, and also perhaps, now though not so obvious, the increase in prosperity in Africa? Do you see these as factors that are bringing about the change that you have so clearly defined, that the cooperation at the global level in political terms is declining? So are these factors?
Let me put it this way, these are not easy questions to answer because of the complexities and nuances, simply because you know so much. The more you know, the less you know sometimes. That being said, China has found its own way to relate globally. Belt and Road Initiative is one example. Them starting the bank is another example. They did not fully engage with the other multilateral institutions because they found that space completely taken over by the others. That doesn't mean that they were not engaging at the UN. They were engaging. Everybody at the political level, everybody was engaging. They were very accommodative as well. India used to, since the early times, very learned foreign officers, diplomats. They're very highly respected. They used to take a ideological stance. What they used to say was meaningful, etc. And they really contributed. Some of it has changed. Not the capability of the Indian diplomats, but let me put it this way, their ability to spin has also increased. Before they were much more straightforward, clear, etc. I mean, sitting in those chambers, very few people can say this. You have observed it over a period of time. They do play a role. However, the war, the conflict in Ukraine, that's the correct UN word, Okay,
Okay.
has changed that equation massively. So that saw the real split coming up. Not that the splits were not there, but that really split. Before, the issue was that, okay, those who had the power knew better how to use the power. Those who had the wealth knew how to better use their wealth. But now the divisions became much more clearer, and that is spilling over into many other issues, not that those were not there. So then ongoing conflicts are exacerbated. But then sometimes when you think you have too much power and you really have a lot more power and you believe in it, then what actually happens is you are going to make bigger mistakes.
I see.
And that's what happened with the decoupling. So they went in full force with the decoupling without looking at all the side effects. This is what I call the centrality of the side effects. All of a sudden, the side effects take the central stage.
Yeah.
So the politicians and diplomats do not agree on their country's failure. So what they did is that they cleverly coined a new term without defining what it is.
Yeah.
So it sounded good, so they can have a ramp out of it.
Yeah.
So many of the states are now asking many of those questions that they were not asking, especially in Africa before, publicly. Why are we not being heard? What are you doing with the raw materials? And why are we not getting those prices that are necessary to be there? So that shift is happening where the optimal equilibrium will lie in the what I call as a circle of life. How long will it take to deconstruct or destroy the bridge? We don't know. Because there is an inertia of globalization which is happening. So once that inertia is there, that speed at which the globalization was happening, it's not easy to decelerate it or put the brakes on. It's a complex subject, Subodh.
No, I know. I don't want to ask you to answer more. I want to pose a slightly different question to you. Now, that perhaps the seeds of the current globalization were sown in, say, 1945 to 1950. Those institutions and ideas, were set up at that time, which led to ultimately, decisions whether to let China in to these places. Of course, China was in the UN, but the UN itself was set up at that time. So these institutions are now coming to be 75, 80 years old. Okay. And perhaps they are showing signs of age, like you and me. So the question is very philosophical, but can these institutions, as you said, the UN has set up sustainable development goals, but they are on either on life support or we are not going to meet them. So what is the way forward for either a new style globalization or, to put it, give a very strange alternative, like the formation of the EU, local regionalization. Many countries come together, give up their political sovereignty to some extent in return for the benefits of the so-called benefits of the economy. Okay, so how does all that fit into your thinking as to because we haven't mentioned the European Union, but obviously when you add up the GDP of the European Union, it's more than China's GDP, right? And so if they are to speak with one voice and to speak with one, is there going to be a shift of some Are they going to have a stronger say, or how are they going to be involved in the future? I don't know any of the answers to this. I'm just thinking these things for some time, and I'm thinking with you what's happening with China, what's happening with India in the global thing, and what's happening with EU, because EU is, as I said, many people don't realize that EU's GDP is quite formidable. You add up all those countries and you get a number that is more than China's. I think China is 15 trillion, EU is 17 trillion, right? And they have created the euro, whatever you say about it, the euro is expanding, not shrinking. So where is all this in globalization, if I may ask you?
Let me say it like this. I went to Barbados about a year ago after the COVID devastation of COVID. So the COVID really devastated small economies and small islands. They tried to close down, then when they closed down, they found the economies were not working, then they opened up, then the COVID hit full scale. And then in Barbados, the Prime Minister was saying that we should be linking with all the small island states and countries near us because they did not have any more dollars to import things.
Yes.
So they were then thinking of a regional grouping. And many more regional groupings are evolving around the world. Forget the large ones like African Union, the Latin Americans, MECOSOC it is called, European Union, etc., and those in the Soviet Empire, the former Soviet Empire, the Russia now holds. These unions do exist, but new unions are also forming. But that will not serve as an alternative to globalization because all regions do not produce everything that they need. EU cannot survive without trade across the world.
No.
So the globalization plus regionalization, so one does not cancel out the other. That's my opinion.
No, I am asking your opinion.
So there will be more growth of these regional unions because they find it beneficial to have those unions. How the deceleration or changes in globalization will affect those regional groupings, we do not really know. We can give opinions about it, but even the most informed opinion will never prove right because there are so many complications involved in these groupings. It depends upon who has what, how much self-sustaining, what happens to their currency. All of a sudden, the wealthier countries may try to entice one or two of those countries away from this grouping to behave as a spoiler. These are all international politics. So it does not go by the logic, but we will see much more of those regional groupings coming up. They found utility in these regional groupings in many ways. And this will continue to grow, as that's my thoughts.
Okay. All right. But you are not particularly mentioning the European Union. So I just wonder whether you have any thoughts of how it fits into the globalization. You said, yeah, they need it for the economy. Obviously, both Netherlands and Germany, they are huge exporters. Netherlands, well known to be a huge export, always been traders. Germany, always been major exporters, and so on. So the large economies, and France also. So they cannot just give up that globalization. But how are they influencing global decisions? That's my question. Are they now a counterweight to US and China, or they are not politically united? I'm just curious. How do you see it?
Okay. Number one, EU acts as one because they have learned that it is beneficial. However, like in India, it's a federal government, all the states don't agree with everything else, but India is India. In the same way, there is a lot of cultural and other ways of behaving that is part of the European Union. The former Eastern European states are very different to Scandinavians. Before there was the Germany, France, Rome, Britain before the Brexit, where the powerhouses, where decisions were actually being taken. The Ukraine war brought all of them very closely together. However, that doesn't mean that it is politics. There is a right wing and the left wing, powerful, and they have to listen to what the people have to say. And people of Europe don't have a single thought. But if they will benefit economically, they will follow where economics and wealth and prosperity comes to the European Union.
Yeah.
But the migration and the saturation of migration in Europe is creating different types of politics. Migration from the south. I'm not talking about migration from Europe, from Ukraine. We're much more welcoming of them.
Yeah.
So there is no, while they act as one, they have different, they are not homogeneous in thought.
Yeah.
One of the things about when I was the Under-Secretary General for the Red Cross in Geneva, the first thing I was telling the senior management, we should think as one, because many of the problems of the world are so difficult. So let us spend a lot of time disagreeing and agreeing and all those things so that we are able to think as one. Europe grew into thinking as one in many ways. However, they have to follow the US in many ways.
Okay. All right. Okay, let me ask. I don't know much about Latin America first, but I'm keen to hear you say or tell us whether they are influential in the global changes that you have mentioned, or they are witnesses, or they are partners. What is happening there, and how does it fit into what you are talking about?
Some of the countries in Latin America, Uruguay, for example, they are much more interested in the quality of their public policy. They are sending peacekeepers, and I once was asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs, why are you sending peacekeepers to the UN? And what they told me was that we want to engage with the world, and this is our way of engaging with the world and with the UN.
Okay.
Argentina is facing a huge crisis of payments. Inflation rates are running in 60%, 70%. Nobody knows when that would stop. It was one of those developed countries which became a developing country. Very rarely has it happened. Argentina has no reason to be poor.
Yeah.
Brazil has gone from extreme right wing to left wing. Some of those countries on the western coast are doing quite well. But again, it is not homogeneous, but they are improving economically, having learned the lessons of structural adjustment, which was devastating for the Latin America. They are much more interested in how they will serve their people, move out, and bring prosperity now. The lessons are not easy. Venezuela is a key example. The minute US imposed sanctions, it went to poverty. It was quite a good country to start with. But all of a sudden, after the sanctions, there were millions pouring out to Colombia. I mean, one day you are a doctor, next day you go to Colombia and you happy to work as a maid.
Yeah.
I mean, any job.
Yeah.
I mean, and so the two things, the influence of external factors plus their own internal governance, which is highly still not stabilized, let me put it, fully. They're better stabilized than before, but not fully stabilized.
Okay. Okay. Now, my last two questions. How is the role of UK? How has it changed? And second question, completely unrelated, but related to my interest in this formation of unions. There's a term, BRICS. So is BRICS still relevant? So those are the two questions. They are unrelated, but I'm giving them to you now because I won't ask any more. This is it from me. So has the role of UK changed? Has Brexit affected its role, or did it have no impact? It still have a role? And what can we make of BRICS, if anything?
BRICS, the minute, no, not BRICS, UK, the minute they stepped out of the European Union, their influence has come down.
Okay.
But they are aligning themselves much more to the US to gain some influence by that alignment.
Okay.
It's a political game that people would actually play. Their UK has taken a huge hit after inflation, COVID, and the Ukrainian war in Ukraine. And with those hits, it is difficult to play. Unless you have money, you cannot be a global power.
Yeah.
I mean, you can build weapons, that does not make you a global power. Unless people are doing trade with you, people will not listen to your influence.
Okay.
BRICS, highly influential because of the players in it. Would all the players go along? I don't want to comment on it. It is, you know that as much as we know.
Yeah.
However, any grouping depends on the major players' influence.
Okay.
Whether they are taking those you can have influence, whether you join them up and create the instruments that you will create more influence. And that, your guess is as much as mine. So what we've looked for is that what instruments have BRICS created that can add more value than they can individually.
Right.
Over to you, Subodh.
Okay. Since you all don't want to express your opinion, let me take the opportunity to express my opinion that, BRICS created one institution that is now called as the New Development Bank. I think it's located in China, but I find it a small player compared to China's own bank, the Asia Infrastructure Bank. And with the virtual collapse of the South African economy, very, very sad situation that we see in South Africa, and Russia actively engaged in, let's call it the conflict, to use the UN term, in Ukraine, and Brazil off on its own, and India and China not really getting along. I don't see any political thing coming out of BRICS, but that I'm just taking the chance to state my opinion here, that it was an idea whose time has come and gone. There isn't much more that I see coming forward, but who knows? I'm not an expert on these matters. Anyway, thank you, Mathew. I don't have any further questions or comments, but if you have some further thoughts, let's have them.
No, not really. But I really enjoyed your questions. The fact about BRICS, yes, they don't have any instruments to play that role. And that's exactly what you have described, and I fully agree with you. It's an idea that did not last to gain much more.
Okay. Well, Mathew, as you know, we will have a panel discussion on this. We will not go through this again, but the viewers, there will be 3 senior people and 3 young people who would have seen this recording, and they'll come and you will be there and we'll have a discussion. Because I think what you are saying is very important and very powerful, actually, for people to know. And I think for you to be questioned by people other than me, some who just be curious, the young who just want to know, and the seniors who probably have their own opinions. And I think it'll be a great session. It's on November 1, as you know. So I'll see you then. If you have nothing else to add, let's end this here for this time. And I'll be back with you for that panel session. And I'll also be back on this channel with other young people and other experts. So let's say bye to the viewers now. So thank you, Mathew.
Bye now.
Bye.
Super. Bye.